Welcome, dear friends. As you all know, we are here to discuss between dialogue and deterrence, right? But actually, we're also here to talk about the book written by my friend and colleague Sharat Sabharwal. And the title of the book is India's Pakistan Conundrum: Managing a Complex Relationship. I just want to briefly introduce the speakers and then we'll plunge straight into discussions. But we'll begin by asking Sharat to give us a little introduction about his book. Now, let me start with Sharat himself. In the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you that Sharat and I are batchmates and very good friends. We've known each other since we joined the Foreign Service in 1975. And right from the time we went to the academy and did our training together, I don't think there's ever been a time when we were not in touch with each other. Sharat has held many diplomatic positions, but I don't want to get into a very elaborate introduction, so let me say that he has held positions, of course, in the Ministry of External Affairs as Director and Joint Secretary and Additional Secretary. But in addition to that, he served in Geneva. He served in Pakistan twice as Deputy High Commissioner and as High Commissioner. He's also been ambassador to Uzbekistan, and he was in Geneva as well as ambassador. So with that, I'll move on to our next panelist, who is Ambassador P.S. Raghavan. Ambassador Raghavan is again a very old friend, though he joined the service a few years after me. Raghavan was our last ambassador to, his last posting was as ambassador to Russia. But more importantly, he's always been a great strategic thinker. He helped to set up the National Security Council and the National Security Council Secretariat, where I subsequently served as the Deputy NSA. And Raghavan has, as I said, been posted in Russia. You were a Russian speaker, weren't you, Raghavan? Your initial training was in Russia. Russia first and Russia last, as he says. But he was also our ambassador to Ireland, our ambassador to Czechoslovakia. Or was it just the Czech Republic at that time? Czech Republic. He was in Prague. And last, but certainly not least, I come to the man who's actually fought the battles, many of which I hope we're going to discuss today. Lieutenant General Prakash Menon, my very good friend and colleague from Takshashila. And again, in the interest of full disclosure, I have to tell you that I'm part of the adjunct faculty at Takshashila. So if you find us being very at ease with each other, you'll know why. Lieutenant General Prakash Menon has served with distinction in the Indian Army, and he has actually led, you've commanded battalions and divisions in Kashmir. You were in the Kargil actions also, not Kargil though, but he has served many years in Kashmir. And he and I were together in the National Security Council when he was the military advisor there. So in one way or the other, I worked with each of these gentlemen right through our professional lives. And I hope this will make for a lively discussion because we all know each other. And we all essentially are deep into the subject of international relations. And of all the relationships India has, none perhaps is as complex and challenging as our relationship with Pakistan. So with that, let me turn it over to Sharat. And I want to start off, Sharat, by asking you to tell us a little bit about why you wrote this book and what your own feelings on the relationship with Pakistan are.
Thank you, Latha. Thank you for those words of introduction. Thank you to the panelists here with us for discussion. Thank you to all of you for coming for this event. Now, I want to, in about 12 to 15 minutes, introduce my book and some key conclusions that I have drawn in it. Pakistan, as you know, is on the brink again these days. as it has been many times earlier, and as it will continue to be periodically until it resolves its dysfunction. A vast gap has emerged between India and Pakistan over the years. Indian economy is now 10 times the size of the Pakistani economy. India's international reputation has grown, Pakistan's reputation has plummeted, especially as a hub of terrorism. And yet Pakistan continues to loom large on our horizon. Now increasingly as a threat in conjunction with China. So there has been an intense debate on how to deal with Pakistan. It has moved between two extremes. On the one end, there is a body of opinion which believes that the common heritage of the two countries and people-to-people bonhomie will take care of all problems. At the other end is a purely militaristic approach, and then there are approaches lying in between. Now, three things I believe has happened in the course of this debate. One, some misperceptions have crept into it. That I believe is the result of justified anger amongst Indian people on Pakistan's conduct over the years. You think about something in anger, you are at times likely to draw wrong conclusions. Two, I believe the circumstances of creation of Pakistan continue to cast a shadow over this relationship till today. Three, also I believe that politics on the issue of our Pakistan policy also impacts our judgment at times. So I have written this book, to assess the ground realities objectively, to address some of those misperceptions, to assess India's policy options, their potential, their limitations, and to suggest a way forward. I'll mention some of the conclusions that I have drawn in this book during this presentation, and I'm sure we'll come to a few subjects as we move on to the discussion. Now, I must say that some of those conclusions are counterintuitive to the Indian mind. But I believe that it's important to recognize the ground realities rather than living with false assumptions, especially when it comes to a fraught relationship like this. First, about the Pakistani state. I don't believe Pakistan is going to disintegrate anytime soon. I don't think it's a failed state, not yet. It has a functioning system of administration, not very satisfactory administration. Public services are not always very satisfactory, but nonetheless a functioning system. Although there are areas of lawlessness, especially in Balochistan and the tribal belt, but it's a highly dysfunctional state. And much of what is happening at this moment is the result of that dysfunction. Dysfunctional because of four major reasons. One is civil-military imbalance, rampant religious extremism and their access to lethal arms, easy access, serious ethnic divisions, and of course Pakistan's tendency to live beyond its means. I examine all these four factors in part one of my book, and my conclusion is that the dysfunction is not going to resolve itself anytime soon because the factors underlying it are immutable in the foreseeable future. Four broad points about Kashmir. One, I believe the only feasible peaceful solution is a non-territorial solution, which means we recognize the existing ground reality. Of course, I also write about the difficulty that Pakistan will have and even India will have in taking such a solution forward because of the positions that they have taken over the years. And now China increasingly casts a shadow on this issue. Because of its deep involvement in a part of our occupied territory, which is the so-called Gilgit-Baltistan, and B, because of its aggressive actions in eastern Ladakh. I examined the understandings that were arrived at in the back channel on Kashmir during the Musharraf era and why they couldn't be taken forward to their logical conclusion. First, because Musharraf lost power before he could do so, and the successor PPP government neither had the political capital nor the backing of the army under Musharraf's successor as the chief of army staff to take them forward. Another point I make about Kashmir is that it does not resonate with the Pakistani people as it might have at one time. Kashmir and the India relationship have not been issues of any consequence whatsoever in the last 3 elections in Pakistan. And I was there for one of them in 2013. You ask a Pakistani politician to win an election on the plank of Kashmir, he will not be able to do so. It's kept alive by their establishment and their ecosystem, A, as a stick to beat India with, B, to bleed us in the valley. C, I believe our Article 370 move did not put an end to the Pakistan dimension of the problem. Pakistan's questioning of the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India preceded the introduction of Article 370 in our constitution and has outlasted its abrogation. Therefore, that dimension is alive. You have to deal with it one way or the other. And then an obvious point that to the extent we are able to resolve the internal dimension of the Kashmir problem, it reduces the chances for Pakistan to fish in the troubled waters. On terror, I describe how the Pakistani establishment systematically sabotaged the Mumbai trial, the trial of Mumbai perpetrators, after a promising start in June and July of 2009, when they gave us 2 dossiers in which they acknowledged for the first and the last time that terror attack took place, was planned and was perpetrated from their soil by Lashkar-e-Toiba. Another point I make is that terror activity may have gone down in the recent years, but it could be ramped up. We have to be prepared for it. I speak of trade between India and Pakistan because a lot of work was done on trade during my tenure as High Commissioner. Now, I believe that trade is important not only because it creates economic opportunities for people on both sides, but eventually it has the potential, it's never gone to that level, but it has the potential to create the constituencies with an economic stake in peace on both sides. I describe at some length the work that was done in 2011 and 12 on trade, which brought us very close to Pakistan giving us MFN status. Although that couldn't be done, again taken to its logical conclusion because the relationship deteriorated 2013 onwards. Then, of course, on trade, I oppose linking of trade to political issues. Now, you may have heard the last 2 years or so, Pakistanis talking of moving from geopolitics to geoeconomics and their emphasis on overall comprehensive security as against only military security. I believe it cannot happen until Pakistan changes its internal and external orientation radically. Without trade and transit links with India, geoeconomics will make no sense for Pakistan. I discuss also the aspect of military coercion in the light of the nuclear dimension to the issue. And my broad conclusion is that the nuclear dimension has not eliminated altogether the space for conventional military action by us, but it has placed a serious limitation on our ability to give a crushing blow to Pakistan militarily to secure an enduring change in its behavior. Now, that being so, I believe that military means cannot enable us, by themselves cannot enable us to deal with this problem. I discuss very briefly what is suggested from time to time. Let's isolate Pakistan to secure a change in its behavior. And I make a distinction between mobilizing the international opinion, which our diplomacy has done admirably well in each moment of crisis. For example, post-Pulwama, and isolating Pakistan to the extent of securing a change in its behavior. I discuss 3 key relationships in the Muslim world, with China, with the US. With China, the relationship is growing. With the US, it's been transactional always. It's become increasingly so. But we saw some transactional activity recently when they gave F-16 maintenance package to Pakistan. And I conclude, and this is of course quite evident, that the Americans are not about to abandon Pakistan. Then moving forward, Moving forward, I believe that we need to make a distinction between the Pakistani establishment and the Pakistani people for four broad reasons. I have a chapter in my book called The Silver Linings. I discuss many positive trends in an otherwise somber situation. But I would mention four here. One, there is a sizable constituency in Pakistan which realizes the value of a stable relationship with India in its own selfish interest. B, the national discourse in Pakistan has become far more introspective than ever before. It's because of the information revolution. It's also because of the increasing signs of failure of the policies followed by Pakistani establishment in the past. Third, there is widespread realization. I perceived it quite clearly of the gap, growing gap between India and Pakistan, that this cannot be bridged. Although the old order doesn't give up easily, but this realization is there. And lastly, of course, unprecedented questioning of the army. You have heard of the Imran Khan phenomenon now. I'm sure we'll come back to it during the discussion. That must be on everyone's mind. I discussed briefly dialogue versus no dialogue. A lot of time of our national discourse on Pakistan has been spent on dialogue versus no dialogue, as if dialogue is not just an instrumentality in our hand, but some substantive aspect of the relationship. Four broad conclusions. Dialogue with Pakistan per se is not a concession, and it need not result in a concession unless we decide to make one. B, when we have not been talking to Pakistan directly, we have talked either through the guns. When guns have become too loud, it has invited intervention by third countries, influential countries, or we have talked through third countries, quite often through the United States, who first serve their own interests before they serve the interests of India and Pakistan. Third, there is no linkage between absence of dialogue and the terror activity going down, or vice versa. The level of terror activity depends upon altogether different factors. Pakistan's internal situation, their preoccupation on the Afghanistan side, their equation, comfort with the Americans and other international influential countries at a particular juncture in time. And then lastly, I find it, someone who spent long years in diplomacy, I find it difficult to accept the proposition that diplomacy and dialogue has no place in a relationship just because it's difficult. Now, I would acknowledge readily that diplomacy and dialogue have not shown the potential, nor has, of course, have the other coercive means to change the fundamentals of this relationship. Or may I say the overall posture of Pakistan towards India. But diplomacy and dialogue has shown the potential and has the potential to help us in a secondary, though important goal from our point of view, of managing this relationship and trying to keep its volatility and violence as low as possible, as happened last year with the restoration of ceasefire, which incidentally came as a result of a dialogue behind the scenes, if you are to believe newspaper reports, then between the heads of our intelligence agencies. The way forward, three quick points. One, there is no silver bullet to deal with this relationship, with this problem. You will have media and TV debates telling you this has been done, now it's the end of our problem, that has been done. It has to be a combination of various instrumentalities at our disposal. Point number two, I believe you cannot normalize this relationship completely until Pakistan remains dysfunctional. You cannot normalize your relationship completely with an abnormal state. But because you cannot normalize it completely, of course, doesn't mean that you don't manage it. You leave it in a state of free fall, or you leave it entirely to the security sector. And my conclusion is that the best we can do in the foreseeable future is to manage this relationship by combining deterrence with the calibrated punitive approach when required, but also dialogue and diplomacy, which should not be written off. While doing so, we should also keep an eye for opportunities that may arise to move the relationship more substantively in a positive direction. One very last point in my book, I believe a significant threat from Pakistan to us has been and continues to be its divisive and exclusionary ideology. And I believe that our tradition of managing our diversity in a democratic manner is the best antidote to that virus. I'll stop here. You can come back.
Thank you so much, Sharat, for that very comprehensive sweeping, I would say, summary of your book. And I'm sure a lot of you would want to read the book after hearing how many interesting aspects of the relationship Sharat has covered in his introductory remarks. Raghavan, if I can turn to you, I know you've written a review of the book, and therefore I know that you've looked at it very carefully from many different points of view. So I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say about your reaction to the book itself and to Sharat's remarks today.
Thank you very much. Let me say firstly, it's a great pleasure to be here at this new venue of the center. I mean, it's been around for a while, but this is the first time I've visited it. And nice to be here. And I will reiterate the disclosures that Latha made about both Sharat and Latha being old friends, and of course, General Menon as well. So that should not take away from the fact that I greatly enjoyed Sharat's book and in fact offered to do a review of it. I would say it's valuable for a number of reasons. Firstly, Sharat talked about it. We've had a period of lack of dialogue, and therefore you do not have media exchanges, you do not have cultural exchanges, you do not have tourist exchanges, you do not have business dealings. Therefore, how do we find authoritative accounts of what is going on in each other's country? And I think Sharat's book is valuable for this particular reason, that it gives you an objective inside view of what is going on in Pakistan, its institutions, its processes, its people, its politics. And for that alone, I think that book is greatly worth reading. But there's also another point to it. You know, he served in Pakistan at, in many ways, a unique juncture. It is unique in many ways, a juncture in India-Pakistan relations. It immediately followed, I think he mentioned this as well, this back channel dialogue, which went to a long way towards trying to find a modus vivendi on Kashmir. I would not say it's a settlement on Kashmir. I would say it was trying to find a modus vivendi on Kashmir. Really, this was the first ever bilateral effort to conceptually, to deal with the concept of an endgame in India-Pakistan relations. And I think that was unique. It was followed, of course, by the Mumbai attacks, the worst terrorist attack that we've had from Pakistan. And, you know, the book describes in great detail how the two countries struggled to keep the peace process alive while trying to get Pakistani accountability for the attack in Mumbai. Also, quite unique, and it's in fact, this is what I read for the first time in his book, the extent to which the Pakistanis actually cooperated with us in the investigation, the amount that they disclosed to us about the results of the terrorist attack, even though they may not have taken action on it, but they did actually disclose in great detail how it was planned, financed, and operated by Lashkar. So it went to a level that it has not happened before. And the third point, again, that he mentioned, I think this is the period when we were the closest to getting a comprehensive trade agreement with Pakistan. We've not done it before, and there's no hope of it thereafter. Now, the fact that all of these did not reach a conclusion, did not reach a satisfactory conclusion, I think is the depressing reality of India-Pakistan relations. The fact that whenever they move towards any kind of a thaw, you have this overhang of suspicion, you have this overhang of political interests and domestic politics coming into it on both sides, which ensure that, and also, sometimes by accident, sometimes by coincidence, and sometimes by design, the thaw gets frozen again. And that's what really happened. And he's talked about, of course, in India, the kind of, I agree with him, that we keep lurching between these, the feeling that reciprocal goodwill should be the basis of how we engage with Pakistan, or the other extreme, that we should have a muscular policy. And then the spectrum in between, we keep exploring at various points of time. Domestic politics becoming an important element here. One of the points that you said, Sharat, was about geoeconomics. About, the declarations of geoeconomics have never been followed up with action. I would say that as long as Pakistan has the heady intoxication of geopolitical livers, it will not look at geoeconomics. I think Pakistan has a strategic location which actually enables it to play geopolitical levers, and global events also at various points of time have worked to enable Pakistan to move these levers. And until that goes on, I think the incentive to use geoeconomics is not there. I fully agree with you that Pakistan, once again, is in a strategic location which will ensure that neither China nor West Asia nor the West generally is going to let Pakistan go down the tube. I mean, Pakistan can never be another Sri Lanka. It will never reach the stage, nobody will let it reach the stage of economic distress as Sri Lanka. Of course, its nuclear weapons have also one reason for that. I will stop here with just this one comment. I mean, you read Sharat's book, you reach the conclusion, which I don't disagree with, that all we can do with Pakistan as of today is management of the situation. I don't think we are anywhere near trying to conceptualize what an endgame will be. Where do we see India and Pakistan 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line? I think we have to wait for domestic situation within Pakistan and an external situation for us to be able to find an endgame that actually suits the people and the governments of both countries. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Raghavan. Prakash, before I come to your advice on military matters between India and Pakistan, I want to talk about your article which you sent me. I found that fascinating. He's written an interesting article entitled Pakistan's Tehreek-e-Insaf's biggest strength lies in its weakness that's tempting for the army. And I was very struck by the fact that you see its strength is lying in its weakness. As you all know, the Tehreek-e-Insaf is Imran Khan's party. And, I think the fact that Imran Khan is so much in the news these days, the sort of meteoric rise as the most popular leader to ever openly challenge and defy the Pakistan army, I think that leads naturally into what makes him so attractive to the public. I want to hear more about the strength and the weakness.
Thank you, Latha, and thank you, BIC, for this honor and privilege. Actually, I must thank Sharat for giving me, I was reading the book, and I had to write my weekly. And the book took me to the weekly, actually. So, it happened because what I was reading was resonating in different forms, but what he describes as the essence of that was running through that book. So, that's how the article actually has come about. I really enjoyed the book. And what is fascinating for me, especially as a military guy, was that not that I've come to realize something new about the Pakistani army, but I was reading it from a person who had spent 2 very important tenures at critical junctures in Pakistan. And the book is structured. It's got part 1, which is actually describes the Pakistani state. And the most fascinating in this thing was the chapter on civil-military relations, on the Pakistani army itself. The villain of the book is the Pakistani army. I mean, that's very obvious, in the sense that it looks like that everything which is going wrong is the Pakistani army. And I don't disagree with that. So what I like about the book is that everywhere there is this thread, or it is embellished with this thread, where his personal either discussions or experience in Pakistan actually takes the argument forward. And that can only come from a man who spent so many years, and especially as a diplomat, so he had all the right connections, and the fact that he could speak the language, that he could speak both Punjabi and Urdu, that also makes a lot of difference. So I would think that the details in the book, in each chapter, there's a lot of detail. And those details, I was wondering whether it was because of those details, because it can only come from the notes which you must have kept, because it must also be the reason why you've taken so long after you've come back and left to write the book. I mean, that probably is the reason. But it makes the book that much more richer. So the thing about what Latha just mentioned is that, as he said, the crucial chapter here, the one which actually, otherwise you read the book, Pakistan is a hopeless case. I don't know how many times he uses the expression a dysfunctional state. That's how he describes it. In most of the places. But when it comes to the silver lining, and I think that is the resonance what I see what is happening in Pakistan. And one of the first things he talks about is the fact about the constituency there, which very much exists, doesn't have the power, but which India must take note of, which believes that friendly relations will facilitate the advantages going to be given by trade and geoeconomics. I mean, there is a strong constituency there. And then he talks about the power of the Pakistani army. One of the reasons why there is a shift, and this is, of course, wax and wanes, in the Pakistani army, is the media is much more freer than it was in earlier times. And that makes it more difficult for the Pakistani army to actually, choke information off. Although I write in my article that, as soon as the information about Imran Khan's assassination took place, and if you see the videos which were actually sent about, one of the videos was about a guy on top of a tank stamping it. I mean, it was actually a civilian actually expressing his hatred for the Pakistani army. So don't be surprised if there is a media crackdown which will also take place. So all that will take place in Pakistan as he describes it. But I think the other point which we need to take about is, if Pakistani army is the villain, then the political forces moving against the army rule is also gaining ground, although they gain and lose all the time. But if you look at what Nawaz Sharif's address from London to his supporters in Pakistan, and he said that, he openly said that it is because of the army. He blamed the army for it. So the PMLN, and now Imran Khan, who was foisted there by the army, is on the same wicket as far as the army is concerned, because the PPP can play. So I think if India has to deal with Pakistan, it must be based on hope. It cannot be based on fear. And that is why this idea of the deterrent notion, not that when they do something to us, we should react, that's all okay. But the fact remains that this is a process. We cannot accept that this is going to be in perpetuity the state of affairs. Whenever we can, as he said, manage it. We should, but we should not give up hope. And I think that is the most important way of dealing with Pakistan. Pakistani army is gaining in strength, waning sometimes, but according to what is written, and I quite agree with you, unless the power of the Pakistani army is reduced in the affairs of the state, very difficult, because their existence, and he writes is about they creating the India bogie to retain power. I mean, that's the fundamental oxygen from which they actually draw their power. So must be hope and not fear.
Thank you. I think, Sharat, I'll give you a chance to respond to some of the points made by Raghavan and Prakash before I go on to my next question. So, would you like? Is there any particular aspect which you wanted to dwell on?
Just a few quick comments. Yes, I agree with Raghavan, and that Pakistan's strategic location gives it an advantage, which it has exploited. So, it has sort of offered its services, provided its services to an external patron. It has needed an external patron right from the beginning, because it has lived beyond its means, so it needs an external patron to right its ambitions vis-a-vis India, economically and militarily. Now, that role was played by the Americans for a long time. That's being shifted to the Chinese now. And that all flows from its the strategic location. The only thing is that there is a realization that these kind of transactional relationships have, and there's a widespread realization, this is written about in newspapers, on their TV debates and so on, that this might have helped us in staying afloat, but just afloat. Beyond that, if you have to move, you have to shift to geoeconomics. So this is not something new. It has been said very often in the last 2 years. They had this Islamabad security dialogue where Bajwa said it and then Imran Khan as Prime Minister said it. But when I was High Commissioner, this notion of a comprehensive security vis-a-vis military security was very much there. And in fact, there was a capsule on this in their National Defense University also. People used to tell me that they have discussions on these issues. But of course, as I said, until they change their internal and external orientation, they cannot make this shift. Trade, yes, we came very close to normalizing the trade completely. Our Commerce Secretaries met finally as culmination of a process of 2 years in September of 2012. They signed a roadmap in which Pakistan would give us MFN status by the end of 2012. In return, we would reduce our SAFTA sensitive list substantially to about 100 tariff lines in 4 months. Pakistan would do that vis-a-vis us, reduce its own sensitive list for India under SAFTA to 100 tariff lines in 5 years. So a concession was given to the smaller economy, and then the trade would be fully normalized. We were working on this. In January, early January, my business contacts told me that Zardari held a meeting in Karachi with business people, and Hina Ramani Kharu was foreign minister and some others, and that he instructed that there are some sectors, I think pharmaceuticals and automobiles, they make fat profits, and they stood to lose those profits if trade opened up with India. So he said, you discuss with these stakeholders, sort it out, I want this project to move forward. Then a minister told me 2 days later that there was an unscheduled discussion in their cabinet meeting, long discussion on this, but generally it was positive that they would move forward. But then there was an incident on the line of control on the 8th of January. I think 2 of our soldiers fell to the bullets of assailants from the other side. Their bodies were mutilated. That unfortunately was neither the first nor the last case of such mutilation. I believe they continued till 2016-17, but there was a very strong political reaction. And then, so it was, what I write in my book, snakes and ladders. For us, It's been like you climb a short stair, ladder, and then the throw of dice takes you to a square where a long snake bites you and you come down, crashing down. Management, yes. In next 10 years, where we will be, I think much depends upon, as you said, upon what happens in Pakistan. Do they resolve their own conundrum? This is the issue, and that prevents a very long-term planning. But I agree with General Menon that hope. I think that should, as a diplomat, this is what I said earlier. Diplomats don't give up until a matter goes to war. Yeah. Until then, they are trying. And here, according to one section of opinion, we should, hand it over entirely to the security sector, as if diplomats have nothing to do with a relationship just because it's a difficult relationship. I realize that, there are difficulties. You're not going to have a big bang solution. Pakistan Army, yes, much is wrong today in Pakistan, I believe, because of what the army has done. That's because they have controlled the affairs of the country, so they must take that responsibility. They don't take that readily. What is said in Pakistan is often, our politicians are bad, they are corrupt, they are weak, etc., etc. Otherwise, Fauj ko, army wouldn't have got all these opportunities, and so on. And I think of politicians who are corrupt elsewhere in other countries, politicians who don't manage things well, but then it's for the people to throw them out, and not for the army overseeing the whole thing and then, taking decisions on that. That is the debate in Pakistan today. Let's see which way it goes. We'll come to Imran Khan phenomenon, I'm sure. Well, I have some views on that. Silver linings, those 4 linings I mentioned, 4 positive points. I have mentioned more in my book. Now, my point is that today they are not strong enough to counter effectively all the entrenched interests, including of the security establishment, that's the army. Not strong enough today, but we should not ignore those trends. We must keep note of them, take note of them in framing our policy, because those trends and tendencies must grow if Pakistan is ever to become a sensible state. So even if it's a small ray of hope there, we must look at it while crafting. And let me say it, here. When the presence of dialogue does not prevent us from exercising punitive approach if it's done quietly and discreetly. But the absence of dialogue makes it difficult for us to keep in touch with the constructive constituencies in Pakistan. If you have no trade and travel, you are not in touch with those people. Everyone is driven into the arms of the army. I think those are the broad points.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Raghavan, I want to talk a little bit about national security here. I know I'm departing from the questions we discussed earlier, but with your vast experience in the Prime Minister's office and your 3rd term now as the chairman of the National Security Advisory Board and the very pivotal role you played in creating the whole national security structures in India. How do you see this from a national security point of view? How do you see the India-Pakistan relationship?
No, you see, at various levels, you start with, of course, the cross-border terrorism, which is an obvious national security threat, and where I think essentially we need to keep raising our defenses. We need to be improving the technologies that prevent terrorism from taking place. We need to strengthen our internal structures, because many of them, let's face it, many of these terrorist attacks have succeeded because of failures in our internal security mechanisms. I mean, you can blame Pakistan. Yes, you should blame Pakistan. But in many cases, our structures could have responded better. And this is what you constantly are trying to do, constantly trying to raise the barrier to so that is one level. The other level, of course, is you come back to this. Eventually, your national security depends on your being able to have a harmonious border, meaning reasonably harmonious relations with all your neighbors. And that's where you come to the larger situation. How do you manage, firstly, manage relations with Pakistan, and secondly, constantly look for an end game, because you do need an end game where you are able to deal with Pakistan in a normal way as you deal with all your other neighbors. With the issues, with the frictions. See, Pakistan relationship has become sui generis now. Completely different from the way you deal with all the others. And if you can get to some kind of a normalcy in relations with Pakistan, that's what. And I'll come to, this management and how do you deal with it, deterrence. See, if you look at the United States National Security Strategy, which they put out recently, it's not there, but in the National Defense Strategy, actually. It should have been in the NSS, but it is in the NDS. They talk about an integrated deterrence strategy. Now, integrated deterrence, of course, first and foremost is military. That is, in addition to strategic deterrence, you talk about conventional deterrence, but you also take into account now the multi-domain war fighting, which is space and cyber and information, electronic and all that. But there is an additional dimension that they bring into integrated deterrence, which is working across the departments of the government and working together with allies and partners in order to deter an adversary from doing what he's doing in order to upset your calculations. Now, this is a much broader canvas. And really speaking, Pakistan does this in many ways, because Pakistan Army's sole preoccupation is India, or its major preoccupation is India. We don't do it quite as well. Deal with some of Pakistan's neighbors, deal with the West, at every stage to see whether we can do things to deter some of Pakistan's actions. I mean, it's not easy. It's difficult. But what I'm saying is that we need to be looking at solutions like this, because eventually, from a national security perspective, the end game is to make India-Pakistan relations similar to India's relations with our other neighbors, with all its warts and with all its differences and with all the small country syndromes that they have. Difficult to do because they're the only nuclear country. They are our only nuclear neighbor. But from a national security perspective, this is what you need to be looking for, and this is what you need to be preparing strategies for.
Thanks. Thanks very much for that. And now, Prakash, coming to you, I want to talk a little bit about the military aspect of our relations. And I wonder if you could shed some light on that. And leading on from that, perhaps we could come back to the discussion on Imran Khan, because Sharat also had some points on that. So once you've done the military part of it, if we could come back to Imran Khan.
When Indian Army officers meet the Pakistani military officers in a different setting, say abroad, the type of bonhomie which actually prevails in terms of the exchanges, although postures might be the same, but there is a certain understanding of the uniform which is there. But what differentiates us and them, the military, is the type of power that they wield in their respective countries. That's the differentiation. Pakistan's military has transcended all principles of democratic governance by either being in power or wielding power by backseat driving, one of the two. That's always been now the default position of Pakistan for quite some time. That seems to, whether it is going to change is now what we are actually going to see. So the question which Latha is asking is whether the present goings on in Pakistan gives us an indication that the two main parties at the moment, and both are actually came to power with the help, and then both of them are now in the boondocks. Nawaz Sharif is in, he was taken from jail and then sent for treatment to London. And Imran Khan in October was actually debarred from standing for elections. And behind all this is, of course, the Pakistani army. So the question actually is whether there is this shift in the political class and how much, as far as the military is concerned, because normally one or the other tries to take the military with them against the other. But is that shifting? Is the Pakistani politics now shifting in such a way that the two main parties, PMLN and Tehreek-e-Insaf, are actually now, can they join up against the Pakistani army's hold on political power? I think that is the question which actually, you get a sign of this on what is happening. I mean, as you read it, as you read the leaves, I might be wrong, maybe he would probably have a better idea, but the thing which can change our relations with Pakistan is when, and he says this, when internally itself the power center moves democratically in political terms. I think when that change takes place, maybe India's relations could improve. There's no guarantee for that, but maybe there is a ray of hope there.
Thank you. I think that's excellent. And now we'll come back to the man of the hour, Imran Khan. So any of you are welcome to kick off this discussion. Sharat, would you like to kick off with analyzing this phenomenon of Imran Khan and where has this wave of popular support come from?
Well, he founded his party in 1996 when I was Deputy High Commissioner.
Okay.
Elections were due in 1997, so Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf all of a sudden. In the three elections after that, 97 election, 2002 election under Musharraf, and 2008, which he boycotted, he won one single lone seat for himself in three elections. He had no success at all. He was a man with some charisma, not some charisma. As a cricketer, he was well known and, a lot of charisma amongst the youngsters, the youth, with the urban middle classes in that capacity. But his political career was not going anywhere. That's the situation that prevailed when I reached there in 2009 as High Commissioner. And I remember he's called Taliban Khan. That's because he used to say, and I heard him say in a meeting, luncheon meeting with ambassadors, that look, they don't realize the Pakistan army and the Americans, the way they are killing people in the tribal belt, that this revenge will last for 7 generations. He said they don't know the Pakhtuns, they will not forgive them for 7 generations, and you will have to. So that was there, and then Islamic discourse is saying Riyast-e-Medina and so on. So he was promoted by the army 2011 onwards. Certainly, when I was High Commissioner, still his meetings became better attended, and the rumor was that ISI was organizing those crowds. Then many people gravitated towards him, especially those who were close to the establishment. Eventually, he comes to power in 2018 with active support of the army. The electoral field completely tilted in his favor. So you had this politician who was charismatic, who had support in some sections of the population, but whose career was not going anywhere. The army gave him a push, and he became Prime Minister. Excuse me. The army also organized some small parties to support him. Those parties are manipulated by them. Eventually, they asked them to pull their support, then made the Imran Khan government fall down. Now, what is going now? The calculation was that he had lost a lot of his popularity by the time he was ousted from power, because his governance left much to be desired. Charisma is one thing, but delivering on the economy and various other things. So the expectation was that once out of power, he'll lose further popularity, and will probably go into oblivion, if not go into oblivion, not remain as influential. The opposite has happened. He has gained support, and he continues to gain the same youth, urban middle class professionals who see him as an alternative to the feudals who have ruled Pakistan so far. And that's become a problem for Bajwa, first and foremost, and for the army. Now, my belief is that the commentaries on this, what is going on, either overestimates it, if I may take 2 more minutes, or underestimates what is going on. The overestimation says it is a democratic revolution. I believe it's not. 2 things we must note. Both the sides are vying for affections of the army. Imran Khan also, shorn of all the rhetoric in what he's saying, he's asking the army to give him an early election. He says, give me an election so that I can cash in on my popularity. Excuse me. The other side wants the army to stay with them. Second, if the army were about to lose its centrality, or there were an expectation, there would be no interest in the appointment of the Chief of Army Staff. That is front and center at this moment. Who becomes the Chief of Army Staff? So that tells you, my own belief is that when this happens, redressal of civil-military imbalance, it will not be an event but a process. And it will come as a result of movement from within Pakistan. You cannot impose it from outside. The Americans tried to do it in 2010 through Kerry-Lugar bill for assistance to Pakistan, in which they said Secretary of State will have to certify that civilian supremacy prevails in Pakistan, some words to that effect. And the army discredited it within 2 days. They said, this is interference in Pakistan's sovereignty. How can they do it? So that approach lost out. So it will be a process, not an event. Underestimating it, saying nothing is happening is not true, because this is one of those silver linings that I talk of. The army has been questioned in the past also. Bangladesh debacle, it was questioned in a big way. When Zia's military rule ended, questioned again. After the turn of the century, it has become more persistent because of the information revolution and increasing signs of failure, the terror backlash in the first decade, when people really suffered. I was there, present there, terror attacks taking all around. So that is there. Criticism of the army is not unprecedented, but its intensity at this time is unprecedented. Imran Khan is doing it sitting inside Pakistan, unlike Nawaz Sharif, who did it sitting in London. So this is one of those silver linings, a trend, a tendency which must grow if Pakistan is to become a sensible state. I'm not saying politicians may turn around suddenly and change the nature of relationship with us. But I believe since this has not been an issue in elections, that tells you that a politician who is looking, who feels the pulse of the people before doing anything, he will pay a little more attention to that than the army. And that's a positive trend, not to be ignored altogether.
Thank you. Before we open up the floor to questions, I want to ask Prakash and then Raghavan if they have any particular remarks they'd like to share on Imran Khan or any other point that we've been discussing.
One of the inputs is that, Imran Khan is very popular with the lower ranks of the army and their wives and children. I think if, it is always the convergence of various vectors which will bring about change. And the vectors here are what he talks about as the silver lining. The question is how much each of them, how much heft do they acquire and then make the change happen. Of course, I also completely agree it's not going to happen just like that. It will take its own time. But let's say at this point in time, there are at least some positive signs in that direction. And as far as India is concerned, you know, last time we had this discussion here when the J&K status was changed, and I was part of that discussion. And after the discussion, I walked down, and then a lady met me out there, and she said, when are we going to get POK? I said, who said that? She said, Modi ne bola hai. So I said, you better ask him. You know, the point is like this, that we must be very clear in our minds that we are, I mean, this book obviously is by an Indian from an Indian perspective about Pakistan. It is an Indian story about Pakistan. Pakistanis have a different story to tell, and we must not disregard that. And I think if we do not take cognizance of what is happening internally in India, which is also, he refers to towards the end of the book, about the fact that we have, in a larger sphere, estranged the population, directed our hate towards that particular entity called Pakistan, that makes the resolution of any sort of positive hope to prevail that much more difficult. That realization we must have.
Thank you. Raghavan?
Thank you. This question about Imran Khan having come to power with the help of the obvious help of the armed forces will now come back to, actually there are, I think, immediate events which will show us where he stands, where the armed forces stand, and where the government stands. Because this long march is now expected to end in Rawalpindi, I think on 19th or 20th of November. 19th of, now the Chief of Army Staff changes around 29th of November. 29th of November is his last day. So it's a very piquant situation. Now, if there is unrest and if there is violence, what happens? This is Rawalpindi. This is the headquarters of the Pakistan Army. So, does the army take action at a time when a change of guard is going to take place, or does the government bring out its rangers and the police to do so? This is what reports are saying now. Reports are saying that the police and the rangers are being asked to... now, it's a situation where you will see to some extent the balance of forces in Pakistan. I mean, I think it is episodic, of course. But the other point of view is that you talked about the middle ranks of the army. There's a popular feeling that middle ranks of the army are more inclined towards Imran Khan. But the army, as you have said in your book and as various other books have said as well, has established itself so strongly in Pakistan in terms of its economic strength in Pakistan, the control over various sectors of the economy. Now, the army, whether it's a middle level of the army, undermining the army in favor of a politician, is really cutting off the branch of the tree that you're sitting on. So you might have an emotional feeling towards Imran Khan, but your own self-interest should prevent you from trying to move in a direction where you're ruining your own future. So I think that these are also elements that will play out. They can continue to admire him, but will they vote for him?
I think the question is, this is really a conundrum. That is what Raghavan's remarks show. And without further ado, let me open this up for some interaction and some Q&A.
As a layman, I have some questions and comments.
Could you speak into the mic,
okay.
sir?
Okay, as a layman, I'd like to ask, Pakistani plays have become so popular among the middle classes, North Indian middle class in India. Do they have any role at all with the middle class or the upper classes, in Pakistan? That's one. Plays on TV, they come all the time. They're very, very popular.
Yeah.
Achha, number two, if we did give away POK to Pakistan, uh, would would it help in the United Nations, their attitudes towards India? And also, in the case of China, since we say that they've taken our territory, then some of that territory would be with Pakistan. So our friction with China, would it go down? And number three, is there a big difference between the attitude of Biden and Trump? Because Trump condemned Pakistan outright, for terrorism, for deceit and all. Well, Biden is giving them F-16s. And, unlike China, which I think wants their pound of flesh, they don't give freebies. The Americans give freebies to the Pakistani army, which sustains them. This is my impression. So
I think we'll get the answers to these questions. And if anybody else would like to ask a question, please come to the front row.
Well, I think this is, the plays are quite popular in Pakistan, their own plays, if that is what you were asking. I know they are quite popular here. I have started watching them of late. I never watched them for a long. When I was High Commissioner, I hardly had the time. Didn't know many of those characters, But they're quite popular here. They are very popular in Pakistan, across the board. It's, these family dramas and so on. And people like that kind of thing. Some people have that kind of taste. So quite popular there. But I can tell you that the Indian movies and music is equally popular in Pakistan. When I was Deputy High Commissioner, I think we were together then. All movies, the VCR, video cassettes those days, were available in Pakistan before the movies were released in India because they came from the Gulf, And even a movie called Border, which had a lot of dialogues, pouring venom against Pakistan, that was also available for renting. We rented it from a local video parlor and, we watched it on our VCR. So I think it's both ways. This is the commonality, the common heritage and so on. There are many bonds of that kind that bind people. And Indians and Pakistanis get famously, in third countries, they get together and they get along famously. But when it comes to countries and the establishments, naturally there are different issues at play.
Thank you. On the F-16s, the fact that the US provided F-16s to Pakistan? Raghavan? Yeah.
Yeah, this question of is there a different attitude of Trump and Biden to Pakistan?
Yeah.
Sorry. You see, Trump did make a statement on South Asia where he criticized Pakistan very strongly. And shortly thereafter, when Trump decided that he wanted to get out of Afghanistan, he started booing Pakistan as well. And if you talk about what Khalilzad did, Khalilzad and the Russians and the Pakistanis and the Chinese, they all joined together to see how they could actually bring the Taliban to power in Afghanistan. So Pakistan became valuable to the Trump administration as well. And look, I think Sharat says this in his book, every administration in America has needed Pakistan, has used Pakistan. We come back to its geopolitical position. And Sharat quotes a naval officer, I think, making a testimony to the Congress, saying that, look, Pakistan, whether it is with China, whether it is with Russia, whether it is with Iran, whether it is with India, and whether its own nuclear weapons, all of these make Pakistan very valuable to America strategically. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but this is what he said in his book. And that's absolutely valid. So, presidents come and presidents go. This is another thing about America. The American strategic establishment has a a view of the world which actually outlasts presidents. Presidents differ in tone rather than in substance. And if you look at the national security strategy of Biden, it is no different from the NSS of Trump except for language. And the objectives are the same. So I do not think we should fool ourselves into thinking that either Biden or Trump will give up Pakistan for India. It's not going to happen.
Okay.
And the other question also I'd like to deal with about POK. Because there, you see, Sharat says in his book, and he mentioned also in the beginning, that the only non-military solution is to accept, sorry? Feasible non-military solution is accepting the line of control as the border between the two countries. Now, I differ a little bit on that, on the emphasis of that. I see no reason why we should go in to accept a border between the two countries. You know, you have to go back into history. Why do we have the situation that we have here? Because of the perfidy of the British and the Americans, which legitimized the Pakistani occupation of POK. You look at the records of the United Nations, you look at all the discussions that took place in the Security Council, from a point where they admitted that Pakistanis had illegally occupied this area, they dragged it in typical Anglo-Saxon manner to a state where they made it into a conflict, where they made it into a dispute, where they said it was now disputed between India and Pakistan, and had this whole range of these commissions and the UN resolutions and so on. It's a different point that we keep talking about, that the resolutions were not fulfilled and therefore we are not obliged to abide by them. The point is that the fact of those resolutions themselves reflects a perfidy of these countries, and it is because of the same reason as what this American told the Senate. The Western powers did not want India to have the strategic advantage of the location, because look at geography. Look at what would happen if this POK was part of India. You would then have a land border with Central Asia. You would have a link to the entire Eurasian landmass, which we are now trying to reach through Iran, and we are trying to do all kinds of things, which is actually a major security. It's going to prove to be a major security challenge for us once the Americans have left Afghanistan. So I see no reason why we should accept immediately a solution of a border which was of a line which was thrust on us to our strategic disadvantage. Eventually, if you have to do it, you need to have some strategic advantage for it. Until then, I do not believe that we should even talk about an LOC as a border between the two countries. What is going on is going on. You don't need to talk about it. I mean, this is my view.
Yeah. So currently our leadership is saying, we won't beg you Pakistan for peace. And also our national security advisor says, if you do one more Mumbai attack, you will lose Balochistan. And also there is Indian stands that terrorism and talks can't go on the same line. So,
could you just repeat the question, please? I don't think we got it clearly.
Okay, sir. And also, they're not said in words, but they're also shown in action through surgical strikes. So, my question is that our earlier political leadership lacks in such a courageous attitude, is my first question. And second question is that, can we expect in future that the army going to become a subordinate to the political leadership in Pakistan? Subordinate. Currently, it's
the second was that the army will it become subordinate to the political leadership in Pakistan?
Currently, it's just a puppet it's a puppet to the army. Is now has become
the army is currently more powerful than the political establishment. What you're asking is if the political establishment can become more powerful than the army.
Yes.
And the first question was?
Our current government is taking more courageous stand in Pakistan.
Yeah.
Like our national security advisor says that if you do one more Mumbai attack, you lose Balochistan. And also they're shown in action also through some surgical strikes like incidents.
Okay.
So, my final question is to the national security advisor, national security issue to Raghavan sir. Currently, we have many agencies.
And not too many questions, please. Let's
question.
stop with these
Last
two.
question.
Yeah.
Currently, we have various agencies like National Security Council, National Security Secretariat, and we have National Security Advisor. We have 4 Deputy National Security Advisors to deal with 4 vertical issues. And also we have Intelligence Bureau, RA, and also at the top we have Cabinet Committee on Security. So can we integrate and bring them under one umbrella to deal effectively with our national security?
Okay, thank you. Just on the last point that you raised, I just want to say that when I was Deputy National Security Advisor, there was only one, which means I was doing the work of all 4. So you can draw your own conclusions from that. Raghavan? Over to you.
You want me to take that one first?
Take them all. Take them all.
No. See, as far as national security is concerned, we have also broadened the agenda of the NSCS since you were last there.
I know.
Which is not to doubt your competence to handle 4 people's job in one. Not at all. No, that's not the point. But his point was, can we not have an integrated setup? The idea is, it is an integrated setup because you have the Cabinet Committee on Security, which is, of course, the executive body, and you have the National Security Council, which incidentally has the same membership as the CCS, but it is supposed to be forward-looking and looking at various national security issues in the future and to prepare strategies for it. The National Security Advisor is a single-point advisor to both the CCS as well as to the NSC. And the whole structure of the NSCS, which is the Secretariat of the National Security Advisor, is supposed to channelize various issues, national security issues, through the National Security Advisor to the CCS or to the NSC, depending on what. So, and then you have a strategic policy group where the National Security Advisor chairs a group of both the security establishment as well as, the economic establishment, because national security today is not just a security issue of the security establishment, because it also includes economic security, food security, and financial security, which today the sanctions have showed the need for, etc., etc., etc. So it is an integrated structure, but national security, since it has become so complicated, it has had to create verticals. By the way, there is also a military vertical in the NSCS. So that answers the question of the NSCS. The other question is, of course, his question was that was the previous government less strong on terrorism than this government, on Pakistan terrorism? Well, look, I think there are various ways of handling it, and this Sharat has mentioned it in his book. This whole spectrum from more dialogue-oriented dealing with Pakistan to a muscular no talk, no terror. No talk unless terrorism stops. This is the other extreme. Now, I would say that probably you would be looking at something in between. That is what Sharat's argument is. Personally, I would say that maybe some forms of dialogue, by the way, are taking place. On the Indus water, for example, we are continuing to have dialogue. Bilateral dialogue does take place. On issues of agriculture and soil across the border and water issues across the border, regular consultations do take place. Perhaps you can talk about more media movement, more cultural movement, and so on. It's very difficult to say. I'm not very sure that it will actually achieve what it has to achieve. He feels that it is required in order to understand each other more. I'm not too sure. I really am agnostic on this subject. And the third question was what?
Army becoming subordinate.
I think that's a question that the two of you should tackle. Will the army ever become subordinate to the government? I can't tell.
I think on this, comparing the performance of governments, that's a slippery slope. That's more probably the politics of the issue. It becomes very difficult for a professional to make a comment on that. But my general impression is that I may be wrong. I think you will bear me out that we have not been sitting ducks. It's not as if we've been sitting ducks in front of Pakistan's misdemeanors and so on, ever. My impression is we have reacted in various ways, sometimes more quietly, sometimes with more, sometimes it becomes essential to talk more about it in public to assuage public opinion. I think that's also a strategy which is required from time to time. But we have in general, let me use this expression, given as good as we got, sometimes quietly, sometimes with a little more announcement, etc., etc.
I do see a certain continuity in security policy as well as in foreign policy. I think the essential aims are the same: to safeguard India's national security, to safeguard our interests in the best way possible. The methods used may be different. The rhetoric used may be different, but I do not believe that the basic objectives ever differed. So, I think with that, maybe we should move on to the next person who asked a question. Yeah.
So, as you said, the conclusion you reached in your book was that the best we can do is manage the relationship with Pakistan. How do we reconcile that with, some of the senior members of the ruling party, such as, Rajnath Singh, and there's other people as well, making particularly antagonistic statements towards Pakistan in the past? And, this is to project a certain strongman image, and they're, definitely they're doing this for their base. But if on the one hand, the diplomacy is trying to manage the relationship, and on the other hand, the ruling party, which, looks like it might be here to stay, is saying these kinds of things, how do those two things interact, and does it throw up any challenges in your job going forward?
I think I come back to the point which I made probably earlier, that I believe we must counter and contain those in Pakistan, in its establishment and their ecosystem, who commit crimes against us. We should do it with a firm hand. We have done it, as I said, sometimes quietly, sometimes with little more announcement being made, etc., etc. But that's what I mean when I talk of a nuanced policy. While countering and containing these elements, I think we should refrain from too many threats in public. Act on the ground when required, that's my belief. Approaches can differ. Act on the ground, act firmly, send the message, it sends across the message. But too many threats held out in public, that alienates even, I think Prakash made that point, alienates even the constructive constituencies in Pakistan, who are then driven into the arms of their security establishment, because then they are seen as the saviors, when temperatures rise too much. But that's one approach. There can be other approaches, I admit that.
Rishi, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. And a few questions. To start with, Pakistan, as you say, receives freebies from the US. But in the Ukraine crisis, initially they were not taking sides. But they've been running with the hares and chasing with the hounds. On the one side, Putin calls them natural partners. On the other side, they are reported to have proliferated nuclear weapons, perhaps rogue proliferation, which is the order of the day in that country, to Ukraine. Secondly, you see, about Pakistan and the military, there are studies on this. Pakistan is 56% Punjabi, and perhaps that is the Sunni Hanafi feudal elite which controls that country. So really, is it possible ever for that, more than the military, for there to be a non-Punjabi leadership? Because the only non-Punjabi military chief was General Musharraf, who I think himself got deposed. That's the second thing. And then third thing with Pakistan again is, so when you talk about economic elements in Karachi, are they really Sindhis or Shias or Ismailis and non-Punjabi, non-Sunni groups. So are they, at the best of times, they are marginal in that country? So these are the main one question I'll ask Raghavan sir, that I'm glad we are having this discussion in peninsular India. Do you think the region India's security was weak, particularly during 26/11, is a continentalist mindset? This may not be the forum to discuss it, but I'd leave that thought with you, sir. Thank you.
Sharat, you first.
Well, Ukraine, I think this is part of that transaction that I talked of, the latest transaction. Various transactions have developed. They neither help the Americans, nor the Pakistanis, nor the region. And yet the Americans keep on coming back to those transactions. The latest, if you ask me, this is my belief, it's centered around counter-terror efforts in Afghanistan post the Taliban victory. Imran Khan wasn't willing to do that. Bajwa was willing to do that. There's talk of their having helped them in killing Ayman al-Zawahiri, etc., etc. Then there are reports, now increasing reports of Pakistan having supplied some military stores, notably artillery shells for Ukraine, which were carried by British military planes from Pakistan to countries neighboring Ukraine and then sent to Ukraine. So, again, transactional activity. They give something to the Americans, and then, of course, the perennial hope of the Americans to wean Pakistan away from China. So you have this F-16 package thrown in. Is it also a little signal to us in the context of our stand on Ukraine war? Maybe. Then Pakistan Army, I think they had, of course, Musharraf was a Muhajir chief, but they had Pathans. They had Ayub Khan, they had Yahya Khan. They had Pathan chiefs. They have had Punjabis, of course. The army remains majority Punjabi, and Punjabis do carry a lot of influence. As I write in my book, a foreign-educated young Pakistani once told me, it seems that Pakistan exists only for Sunnis Punjabis. Sunni Deobandi Punjabis at that time, not even Barelvis, because Deobandis had the upper hand at that time. They were picking up the guns more readily, and they were killing people all around. So that kind of dominance remains. Economic elements, would you like me to cover very briefly?
Yes.
Whether they are, no, they are equally strong in Punjab also. Lahore business community is equally strong as the Karachi business community. They do carry a lot of influence in echelons of power. Except that they do not carry influence to the extent of, being able to counter the chosen paths of the security establishment. For example, when this incident happened on the 8th of January, I told you activity was taking place to normalize trade. And many rich Pakistani businessmen, big fellows, they had invested money in carrying out studies of the Indian market. So when this incident happened and suddenly dialogue stopped, some of the phone calls that I received were from the business community in Pakistan, saying what's going on. So I asked them to speak to their own security people. Why were they doing all this, So that was a sign. And Punjabis, they invited me as much. I went to various chambers of commerce in Punjab at their invitation, more than once, to Lahore, to Faisalabad, to Sialkot, Rawalpindi, etc., etc. So it wasn't as if only the Karachi businessmen and non-Punjabis were doing it.
We operate on a very strict time restriction here in BIC, so we have reached 8 o'clock. So I think we should be concluding the session. But before we end, I will just give 30 seconds to each of you to give your last words on Pakistan. I'll start with you, Prakash.
I think that we should also hold a mirror to ourselves when we talk about our relationship with Pakistan.
Raghavan?
No, I agree with that. And the other point is that we spend too much time on Pakistan because of domestic political reasons. I think we need to be looking at China much more seriously. As they say, fight somebody your own size. So I think that's what we need to be doing.
And Sharat, as is only fitting, as the author, you get the last word of the day.
No, I agree with both of those observations, wholeheartedly agree with them. Yes, China is our bigger problem. In fact, Pakistan is becoming a part of our China problem now. Their nexus is very deep. We couldn't discuss that
indeed, yeah.
during this session. So Pakistan will remain a problem. I do agree that because of our politics, it gets too much of salience in our discussions and so on. But on the ground, it remains a problem. You have to deal with it. And what I recommend, and I would again say the same thing, manage it. Just because it cannot be normalized, let's not leave it. I have in mind a very specific post-Uri situation.
Yeah.
Where, it went into a free fall almost in the hands of the security sector, was that eventually we had dialogue amongst intelligence agencies to restore that ceasefire, but dialogue nonetheless. So manage it, but keep an eye. Opportunities may arise. There are these trends in Pakistan. Do not ignore them. Just because they are weak today. Opportunities may arise from time to time to move it more substantively in a positive direction. Now is not the moment. Their politics is too polarized at the moment. So Shahbaz did a little thing. Imran Khan will say it's a sellout. Nothing can be done. We have to await for them to go through with their election. The new chief comes in. There may be some opportunities to open up to make the management mode a little better and gain some of the gains of the past which we lost in the recent years.
Thank you so much. I'm sure you'll agree with me that this is the most interesting panel discussion. I thank the questions that came forward. They also led to a lively discussion. And may I ask you all to put your hands together for a very wonderful panel. Thank you.